It absolutely breaks my heart when I see someone excitedly announcing the launch of their podcast and there are telltale signs that they haven't given it any thought whatsoever. They've recorded a trailer and they've stuck it out in the world. And I'm paraphrasing, but it will be something along the lines of, I'm going to tell more stories in the business world by interviewing thought leaders within the world of business. You've just described 30,000 shows. What's yours going to do differently?
Hey there, I'm Sadaf Bainan, and this is PodJunction Podcast, the show where business leaders share how they use podcasting to grow, connect, and build their brands. Most business podcasts launch with big dreams and die quiet deaths. But what if you had someone who'd been in audio since the 1990s, made every mistake in the book, and now guarantees results for their clients? Today, I'm talking to Neal Veglio, founder of Podknows Podcasting and host of Podcasting Insights. Neal, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Sadaf. And thanks for throwing me right under the bus by saying about all the mistakes I made over the years.
You're
straight
welcome.
away. Brilliant. Thanks for that.
You're so welcome. So, Neal, let's jump in. You worked in audio since the 1990s.
I have, yep.
How did that lead to launching Podknows and your own podcast?
I love this question because it just gets it gives me a chance to go right down memory lane. So I started out in the radio industry. I was doing, local commercial radio in the mid-90s. That's kind of where I learned to ply my trade with audio. I was always getting in trouble because I was not content with, grabbing the mic, talking on the radio and just doing it straight as, the top 40, we called them top 40 liner card jocks. And what they were was basically they would read the liner card that promoted the breakfast show, or they would talk about the chart at the weekend, or they would talk about something that was like doing the job of, keeping the radio station flowing. And I was what they would call a maverick. So I liked to experiment with audio and I did a lot of production stuff. So there was skits, jokes, I'd go into the other studio and record silly little bits and pieces that I'd then play on the air. And that was kind of where I started to get the idea that actually you can make just a quick throwaway 3-hour show on a Sunday into something a bit more engaging for the audience if you just put a bit more pre-production and a bit more planning into it. And that kind of, I got a taste for what audio production and presentation was and mix those two together. So I was never just a presenter. I was also a bit of a producer as well. And then as I sort of developed in my career, I moved to London. I got a couple of national radio station gigs, and they don't like that. They don't like people that sort of think outside the box and do the playing in of audio. So I had to be really clever about how I did it. And started to, work with callers. I'd get callers on the air and I'd make them the characters. And so they would be doing the parts where usually I'd be having like a zap or a sound effect or something or some skit. And I'd actually be, prepping them off air and saying, right, okay, so you've called in from this. What's your topic? They'd tell me and I'd go, right, okay. So imagine, and then I'd give them a scenario. And so they then became the characters. Which still didn't please my bosses at the time very much. They're like, can you just do the show? Can you just do it straight? I'm like, nah. But what it did is it taught me quite early on that actually characterization and storytelling is really important for audiences. They love to be told a story and have everything sort of changing on them. So, having one voice on the air can be quite dull and you can tune out. Whereas if there's lots of stuff going on, like different voices, different things happening, some drama, and believe me, I created a lot of fake drama as well through my callers. I'd get them to say, say that you hate my show and you don't like me and then have a go at me. And they'd be like, oh, this is so much fun. Of course, I'm happy to say I hate you. Yeah. So it just taught me really early on that, one voice can still tell stories as long as you can approach it from different directions. And that's where, as podcasting started to grow, when I started out in the mid-2000s in podcasting, really, it was kind of tech geeks. They were talking about tech news. In fact, one of my favorite shows at the time was called Twit, This Week in Technology. And I used to listen to that, and they were talking about iPods and where technology was going in that direction. And I just thought, this is interesting content, but really boringly delivered. And so I started to sort of experiment with how I could tell the same sort of stories that I was telling, on the radio, but in podcast format. And yeah, like you said in the introduction, failed a lot. I'll be honest.
I've read your LinkedIn posts.
Exactly. Oh, I'm always too honest on LinkedIn. Absolutely. But yeah, it gave me this passion for understanding what worked and what didn't work. And as I sort of developed that skill set and understood, actually, you can take people that are not famous and make them interesting to their ideal audiences. And that's kind of where Podknows came from, essentially. It was learning how to tell other people's stories using their voices, but with my own creativity added into the mix.
That's really fascinating, Neal. It's really fascinating. If you don't mind, just going back a little bit to what you were talking about, your pre-podcasting days. What was your favorite part about that?
In terms of the radio stuff, in terms of what I was doing then?
The storytelling and the voices and so on and so forth.
Creating the drama was something I was really hooked into because obviously, I grew up watching a chap called Kenny Everett, who was a big, he was on Capital Radio back in the 80s. That was kind of what he was famous for initially. And he had a television show, and it was called The Kenny Everett Show. The Kenny Everett Experience, I think, was the second series. And, he was out there, like ridiculous. I mean, he died of AIDS in the end, bless him. But, so he died very young. But the impact he made in his 20s and early 30s before he died was massive. I mean, he was breaking all the barriers and all the, some people called him indecent. I don't think he was ever indecent. He just pushed the envelope. And listening and seeing what he was doing with characters and with just setting the scene with ambience and tone. And he had this character called Captain Kremen, who was meant to be like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, just this chap that was going around the universe in his spaceship. And he used speeding up tape to make alien noises and alien voices and things like that. And I loved that. I hated the idea of just saying, oh, that was Britney Spears and here's Justin Timberlake. I just wasn't really engaged by that whatsoever. But I was engaged by, here's Shirley from Watford. Go ahead, Shirley. What you got to say? Oh, I hate your show. You're so rude. Great. Okay. And I just go with that. Like, okay, why? What have I done now, Shirley? What, and just having that engagement of making people into characters and really helping them to find their voices. They would come on again. Like they would, it wasn't a case of, all right, well, I've called up the radio. I feel cool now. That's good. I've had a chance to be on the radio and I played this character. It was like, I want to do this every week. And so they would become recurrent callers. They would, and they would look for, the more they would come on the air, the less I'd have to coach them because they would like totally buy into their character. And that's where sort of like the whole thing around characterization, in what I do now comes from is, when I talk to people and I say, right, we need to develop your character. They're like, what? This isn't Friends. And, I'm not Rachel. I don't need to be a character. And I'm like, well, you do, because the things that you think you're famous for or that you want to be known for, they might not be that engaging for your audience. But the things you don't talk about, these might actually be your character. So, for example, if you're really scatty or forgetful or, you have this bizarre affinity with Crocs, that's the stuff that you don't want to bring out on your show. But actually, those are the things that make you relatable. And those are the things your listeners are going to really hook into. Like, oh, what? Why does this woman like Crocs? Nobody likes Crocs. They're a blight on humanity. But it's little subtle things like that where when you start to develop that character, that's what makes for entertaining and engaging audio. I
really like what you've said because you talk, it's very clear that you loved having that dramatization part of the radio, and you were engaging, you were making it engaging, and you were building an audience of people who wanted to keep coming back, to be on the radio. And I think those are important lessons for podcasting as well. Like they do translate. You need to love what you do. You need to be able to engage with the content that you are presenting and build an audience, a community that will keep coming back for more.
Absolutely. I think people really can see through fake enthusiasm. And I think this is what I always try and tell people is, starting a podcast, it's kind of become like the thing, hasn't it? Like, I need to do a podcast for my business, or I need to do a podcast to promote this thing that I'm doing. And it's like, well, yeah, that's really useful and it's great and it's tremendous fun, but you've got to be doing it for the right reasons. You've got to really want to do it. You've got to be able to understand that this isn't just turning up and playing radio star for the day. This is like it's a whole thing. It's something which you're putting yourself out there to entertain an audience, and you've got to entertain them. You've got to engage them without having that passion for it, without having the good reason to do it. You're going to quit really soon. You're probably going to get through 5 episodes and then think, actually, this isn't really for me, if you're not doing it for the right reasons. Because Sadaf, yourself, it's not easy. People think, oh, podcasting, that's easy. I just plug a microphone in and I talk. Well, yeah, that is the fundamentals of it. You're plugging in a microphone and talk. But you're having to think about, number one, what are you going to do when you get 3 people listen for the first few months? Because that, unless you're working with a strategist like yourself, that's highly likely. People don't just find podcasts. There's a lot involved in the marketing, in the optimization, in the strategy of launching it, to get that ideal audience listening. So there are so many reasons not to start a podcast. You've got to really want to start a podcast to overcome those. And I think when you're not doing it for the right reasons, on a fundamental level, of course, people can tell, because there's something in their subconscious that tells them, I'm not really buying this person's voice. They don't really sound like they're genuinely here for me. They sound like they're just ticking boxes. So, for me, it is fundamental. You've got to have the right reason to do it.
Awesome. Yeah, 100%. You also talked about character development. Tell me a bit more about how you do that. That's really fascinating.
So usually my method is, I have a couple of conversations with, if somebody wants to start a podcast, whether it's them as an individual or maybe they've got a team, what I'll usually do is whether it means I've got to go into their office if it's a corporate podcast and hang out with the team and find out what makes them tick. And, I hate to say it's like an interview process, because it really isn't. I hope it's much more fun for them than that. But it is kind of like the whole sitting down, right, so tell me about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What's your role? All that sort of stuff. If it's an individual, it's much more simplistic. Is sit down and have a couple of Zoom chats with them. Yeah. But what I'm looking for the whole time is, what is it about them that is unique to them? And I'm not talking like, their voice, their story, what makes them tick necessarily. It's more about, what are their nuances? What are the little sort of like quirky things within their personality that make them really unique, that they might want to hide? They might think, oh, I've got this really embarrassing thing I do where, I just go off on a tangent. And I work with a lot of ADHDers, honestly. I seem to attract neurodivergent people. Now, neurodivergent people, you probably know yourself, they tend to start to go down one avenue and then they'll come to a turning and they'll go all the way over here. And it's about understanding that actually that's part of their character, where most people might edit that out and go, okay, no, back to the point now. I sort of look at that and I go, okay, but that's what makes them who they are. And so is there a way that you can introduce this element of them as a part of their character and actually lean into it and make it not funny, because we don't want to laugh at people that, if they've got a disability, but make it so acceptable within their personality and their character that the listener comes along for the ride and understands, okay, so, oh yeah, they're doing that thing they do again. And then it's almost like using sound design. I've got this one particular case with an ADHD business coach. And what we would do when she went down a tangent, I literally found this electric guitar, sound loop sample, and I stuck a breakbeat behind it, and so it was like, and for that whole section where they went off on where she went off a tangent, Katie McManus, her name was, she went off on a tangent for like 30 seconds. That was the bit. It was like, okay, yeah. And now it's ended. Right, we're back into the main show again. And listeners loved it. They were like, I am listening out for the
for
I mean, she
those.
called them sidebar moments. And so that's, but the listeners were writing in and saying, you only did 2 sidebar moments in this episode. Where are they? They're our favorite bit, and it's like, it got to the point where she was smiling and she'd literally go out of her way to put the more sidebar moments in there to make the episodes more engaging. Absolutely. Yeah.
That is so cool and really insightful on your part too, to be able to make that part of the show, because that's part of their character rather than, as you said, edit it out.
It takes practice. I mean, if you don't ever key into it for the first. I mean, if you're batch recording, this is why I always say batch recording is useful, because over a period of time before you launch, if you've recorded, say, 4 to 6 episodes, over the course of those 6 episodes, you're going to pick up on the repeating patterns. You're going to figure out what it is about this person or this team, where they normally go. Like, if you have a team of 3 or 4, you might have one person that keeps getting picked on. Like, not in a mean way, but like they just have a bit of banter, Oh, there goes Kieran again with his, going off and being boring, oh, shut up, Kieran, and you pick up on those kind of, no Kierans were harmed in the making of this episode, by the way. I've totally made that name up. But you pick up on nuances within these teams that you can then lean into, and sort of after you've got, say, 5 or 6 of these recorded, you can go back to them and say, did you realize that you all pick on Kieran and you're basically bullying him, but it's funny because he's laughing with you. We need to lean into this. And it almost needs to story arc to Kieran gets his own back. So maybe in a future episode, we can have Kieran being like, I told you so. I was right the whole time. You were wrong, little things like that you can over time pick up on, and you can almost like, once you've understood that and keyed into it, you can almost go back and re-edit the first episodes to include more of those moments in, so it's much more consistent throughout the story arc of your show. Yeah.
I really love that. And it keeps it engaging. It keeps it also educational. And so people will obviously want to come back. That's really good. For sure. Really good.
Yeah.
Neal, what made you decide to focus your business around helping others with podcasting?
We're getting a glimpse into my checkered ego past now. This is so. In all honesty, so I absolutely loved being, a morning show radio DJ. To use the common vernacular, we'd get told off. You're not DJs. You're not picking the music. You're radio presenters. Okay, yeah, whatever. We were DJs. That's what we were known for. I loved my time being a morning radio DJ, but I needed to be challenged. So if I came into a radio station where the morning show wasn't performing particularly well, and I knew my brief was to get the audience up and compete with the local, I normally was the guy that would come in on the underperforming station. It was the kind of what we would lovingly call the Tin Pot radio station. And then there was a dominant, like, big player, usually owned by Capital Radio, the Capital Global, as they're now known. And I would have to come in and sort of like raise the profile of this station, essentially by being controversial and, edgy, and doing all the things I did that program directors knew would build audience. But if I wasn't challenged, I didn't enjoy it as much. If I came into a radio station that was already established, I found it less of a challenge, and therefore I got bored more easily. And I would usually last about 12 months before I'd be like, right, I've got to move on now. And I'd go to another radio station. I found that didn't happen so much when I took a bit of a back seat and was there to help someone else. So I'll give you an example of this. As the radio industry started to implode and, there were less shows available for people. And it's a bit like the music industry where the older you get, I mean, I was approaching my early 40s by this point. I'm nearly 50 now, just to sort of like put context on that. As you get older in the radio industry, your opportunities are fewer and far between because they think people want young voices, which they probably do on pop stations. I mean, you're not wanting this old fart on Kiss FM going, yeah, it's the latest one from Calvin Harris. That's not what they're looking for. They want young, vibrant voices. So I was sort of forced into a situation where some of the jobs I took going, later in life were more kind of consultancy, were, more production. So teaching, coaching presenters. I became kind of like the management role, if as it were. But because radio stations, if they're not massive stations, they don't have huge budgets for these people. You'd find you'd be doing 2 or 3 different roles. I found when I was producing other presenters, I got so much more out of it. It just, something in me sparked like, oh, wow. I've taken this person from having 0 audience or not much audience to suddenly they're getting callers, they're getting texts, they're becoming popular online. That really filled my cup. And it helped me understand that actually, if you put my ego to the side, actually there was value in my skill set that I could bring to others. And I think that was the turning point for me, was after I'd done this a couple of times, I realized the satisfaction I got from producing others and coaching them and helping them to grow their audiences was way more fulfilling than me going, oh, yeah, well, of course I've just grown another breakfast show. Of course I have. That's what I do. Ego, complete ego. Like, I'm not challenged because I realize I appreciate my own talent. That's kind of not the point. The point is appreciating other people's talent. That's the real challenge, helping other people to grow. And so the more I leaned into that, the more I realized that's what I actually wanted to do. Yeah.
That's very cool. So it was the challenge that was pushing you.
Always has done.
Yeah.
Always has done. I've never liked being tough. My wife would tell you this. Like, if we're at home and a door doesn't close or something, or, something doesn't lock, and then we'll go, well, let's get a new door. No. We're going to make this door lock. I'm going to go and get another mechanism. I'm looking at a YouTube video and I'm fixing this lock. I don't accept that things don't work, and like, even on a more simplistic level, if my family are going on holiday and my dad will be like, we're not going to get 3 suitcases in the boot. Oh, we will. We'll just shove everything and move it around and angle it differently. Oh, look, Dad, 3 suitcases in the boot. I've always been like that. I thrive on challenge.
Yeah, it's a good mindset, isn't it, to have?
I like to think so.
I think so, definitely.
But I would.
Neal, do you see podcasting more as a marketing channel, a business development tool, or something else entirely?
Oh, good question. Depends where you're coming from, I suppose. Fundamentally, for me, it is a marketing channel. And this is why on a business, it depends where you come from. If you're coming from the point of view of business and revenue and wanting to use podcasting to create cash flow, it's a marketing tool. I've always felt that. The evidence that I've seen has definitely backed that up. There's a whole contingent of podcast gurus who say, sponsorship advertising, entire publishing companies have been set up based on that model. I mean, Acast is one of those, Wondery, another. One of my best friends, her husband, he runs a company. They're called Stack, and that's what they do. They sell IP. So in other words, they have the talent that they give the podcasting job to, and then the way they make their money, it's not the talent that pays them to produce the show like many of us podcast production companies do. It's actually the talent that gets paid by them, and they're using inventory and the idea, the IP, to sell advertising and get the show sponsored. I don't subscribe to that because I think you're then only as valuable as your profile is or what you're talking about is, and you're relying on, independent companies to see value in what you're doing, versus my model that I prefer, which is you sell yourself as the product. So the podcast is the marketing tool. It's the platform. It's just like a newsletter, just like a website blog, just like a YouTube channel, just like social media, like any of the other tools that you have at your disposal. The podcast is helping that. And frankly, in my view, it does a better job than any of those other channels. YouTube, newsletters. Newsletters are obviously complementary to a podcast. But selling yourself as the product, as in your expertise, what you can offer to people that are willing to, engage your services, that is much more valuable and viable, I feel, than getting $25 per 1,000 people listening to your show, which is that sort of that model that those companies tend to lean into. So yeah, I think it is predominantly a marketing tool, but I think it's also, I mean, I do podcasts for fun. I've got, behind the scenes, I'm working on, I wrote a sort of like a semi-autobiographical book, which I'm now in the process of turning into a podcast. It got a publishing agreement from a small publishing company. They went under, so that never happened. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to sit around moping that I never got my book deal. I'm just instead, the book deal I got, evaporated. I'm going to make something of this and turn it into a podcast. So, and that won't be for monetary gain. It's just literally, it's creative work that I want to put out in the world. So I think this is the problem. A lot of people don't really get what podcasting is. They think it's just this thing that you do that makes you money. And I think you could not be further from the truth with that thought, personally.
Yeah. No, that's very good. So if you are the product and you're selling yourself, what kind of conversations would you be having on your podcast? Would you have guests? Would it be solo? What would you say?
I'm going to be very controversial right now.
Okay.
You might want to edit this out, Sadaf. I would say if you're selling yourself as the product, think twice about guests. And I know this is kind of ironic because this is kind of what we're doing right now is, you obviously, and let's be committed. We had a conversation before we even recorded where we both agreed we do the same sort of thing. And I said, well, I'm not going to steal your audience from you, Sadaf. I'll happily give insight, but I'm always going to tell people, you have this show and this audience for a reason. They like what you talk about. They love your insights and they love you probably. You probably got people listening that absolutely love everything you stand for. So for me to come on and go, oh, but, I could do what you do better, which is like never a good idea. But the amount of times I hear that on other shows, no, it's the whole point is that you have the expertise. You bring people in to fill in the blanks. But at the end of the day, they're there to do a purpose to educate the audience. They're not there to sell to the audience. So I would always say, if it's something where you are selling yourself as the product, lean into solo shows, lean into, and have guests to help bridge the gaps in your knowledge. But under the understanding that, for sure, all ships rise in a high tide. I've always subscribed to that and always will. But you have to also remember that you have the relationship with the audience. If you're bringing someone in to, share that audience with you, understand the audience is not there for them. Like half your audience, more than half your audience is not going to care about who I am. They might find what I'm saying interesting, but they're not going to have that affinity and that loyalty to me that they've got with you, and vice versa. If you were to come on my show, oh, I love Sadaf. She's great. I'm going to follow her on LinkedIn and check out her stuff. But Neal's my guy. Yeah. So do you see what I'm saying? And I think this is the mistake a lot of people make when they're doing this, is that they go, I'm just going to get loads of experts on and use them to share my episodes and get attention. Where actually what they should be thinking is, I am bringing value to my audience. I hate the word value. It's a Gary Vaynerchuk thing. But anyway, I'm bringing insight to my audience. And if I can get other people to come in and help me to do that, help my wider mission, great, happy to do that. But they're my audience. Hands off.
No, I like what you said. Yeah, I totally agree. I think that rising tide boats, whatever it was you said. I totally agree with that too. And I think more people should do that.
I think what a lot of business owners don't understand, I've had this before with some of my clients who have said, Neal, this guy, he invited me on his show, and then he obviously did his research too late. And then about an hour before, he obviously looked at my LinkedIn profile, realized we'd do the same thing, and then suddenly made up some excuse and cancelled.
Oh, dear.
And I'm like, okay, so this guy doesn't understand business. You know, at the end of the day, we don't work with people because we think they're the only person that can do what we want them to do. We work with people because we've built a relationship with them.
Yeah.
So there are always going to be, you know, if we took it on that two-dimensional competitive level, which these sorts of people work on, there are going to be people that would never in a million years work with me, and there are going to be people that would never in a million years work with you. And it's never personal. It's never anything nasty. It's just the way that their sensibilities are. It might be their values, their ethics. It might be that they look at me and they go, I don't ever want to work with a man. You know, it's valid. There are a lot of, femme favoring business owners because whatever they've got going on in their lives, maybe they just think men are toxic or whatever. You know, it's valid. It's totally valid. Maybe something's happened in their life that's made them wary of any male influence. So, you know, there are always going to be people that will have boxes that are ticked by some people and not by others. So it's really our job to give them all the options and let them choose. That's it. And by trying to hide people from them, it's not going to, they'll find them. People find their people no matter what.
Yeah, I like that. Neal, I want to just change direction a little bit. What are some of the biggest wins you've seen come from your own show or from your clients that you've worked with?
In terms of my own show, definitely people coming up to me at in-person events and saying, wow, thank you for saying that. Whatever it is, they'll come up to me and they'll say, that thing you said about, I don't know, charts. I'm like, I said something about the charts? They'll be like, yeah, episode 19 in 2022. Oh, okay. I'm glad you enjoy. You know, wow. It's always and that's similar to my radio career, where people would phone up and they would tell you about something you said 3 weeks ago that you've long forgotten because it was just in the spur of the moment. It's that for me is I love that because it shows that you've made a shift in their life. You've impacted on their reality in quite a significant way that then grounds you back into that moment of like, okay, I recorded that 3 months ago, and edited it down and published it and forgot about it, never to think about it again, probably. And someone's come to me and they've said that's made an impact on them and they've completely changed their entire strategy around that particular topic. I love that. I've also seen that with clients. One particular client recently, they're called The Rock Fight. They're an outdoor industry podcast. And they were at an event. And again, like Colin, I was just chatting to Colin last week, actually, on our regular calls that we have. And he said, we did this live, we went to a conference, brand new conference. We were allowed to do a live recording, live taping of the show. And I peered through the curtain backstage and I saw 3 empty seats. I was like, oh my God. And then he said his producer said to him, what are you talking about? It's 10 deep out there. And he looked at, and as he found out, at conferences, no one wants to sit in the front row. Why? Because they think you're going to pick on them. So everyone always sits a row back. I had this myself at the podcast show a few weeks ago. I was on a stage and I said to people, come forward. What are you doing over there? Come forward so you can hear me. And people were like sheepishly, begrudgingly moving forward because they thought I was going to pick on them. And I think that realization that he had of, oh my God, I thought I was going to be crickets here. I thought we were going to just record the show regardless and just realize there's no one there, to, oh my God, there are people queuing up to get a seat. It's that for me, that's impact, because it means that your message is definitely connecting with your audience and giving them the intended insight that you always want to give them. There's more value in that than anything, honestly. Who needs downloads when you've got that real life impact that you're making?
Yeah, 100%. And you were talking about resonating with your audience. It's that, and then the impact that you're able to make. But how do you do that well?
How do you make impact? Oh, deep question. Nice. I like it. I think you have to face the fear and say what needs to be said, even if you feel like it's going to not land well with some people, but if it's true to you, you have to be brave enough to say it anyway and understand that, again, not everyone's going to like you. And actually, if you go out of your way to be intentional about that, and, I did a LinkedIn post about this the other day. I literally said, I became very comfortable years ago knowing that people aren't going to like me or what I say. But that's part of the qualification and disqualification process, not just in sales and marketing, but in life. We are taught you are the sum of the 7 people you spend the most time with, to quote the whole how to, win friends and influence people. Yeah. Some people have a big problem with that book. Some people don't. But the point is, they're onto something with that message that if we try and be all things for all people, we make zero impact on anybody. Whereas if you are staunchly into your message and you believe what you believe, you share that belief unapologetically, as long as you don't say something that's harmful or, abjectly wrong. I've got the 3 biggies, no racism, no homophobia, no taking people down for who they are. Those are my 3, non-negotiables. But anything else is valid. And so if you're willing to say, what these people over here are doing is wrong, even if those people are a big part of your audience doing the wrong thing, so what? If they get upset, they're not for you anyway, because they're doing the very thing that you're saying is wrong. And I think too many people, what they try and do is they go for that center line of, okay, well, I don't believe, like, charts is a big one for me. There are so many people that manipulate the charts. Charts aren't valid anyway. They don't measure popularity of shows. This might be triggering you. Maybe you believe in the value of charts, in which case you're totally, you're welcome to think so. But I certainly prescribe to charts are a measurement of velocity of follows, and that's really it. It's trending. Most new shows will hit the charts. That's the whole point. They've started from 0 followers. Apple Podcasts measures new followers, ranks those based on, velocity, and then assigns a chart ranking based on it. But that's it. So you can be, for the first 2 weeks, in the charts with a brand new podcast. Then you'll find it much more difficult to get in there again because now you've got followers. So the weighting of that, if you don't understand how charts work, then definitely do your research, because it's fascinating how it works. But to my point, I might be saying charts are pointless and they don't matter versus, and there might be somebody in the audience that goes, oh, well, I base my entire marketing on chart rankings. Okay, you do you, bro. That's fine. That's cool. But I'm saying you're wrong. I'm saying you're basing the same with the top 1% in listen notes that people, a lot of podcast influencers will stick that on their website. I'm the top 1% podcast consultant. Oh, are you? Okay. According to whose data? And people don't like it when you say these things out loud, because it's like, oh, this is that's the uncomfortable sort of unsaid. And I think unless you're willing to be that person that's saying the uncomfortable unsaid, you're going to struggle to make impact, because people that live in comfort don't necessarily make impacts. They just make friends. And who needs friends?
And I think they can be quite surface level relationships as well, friendships or audience, however it is you want to frame that.
Absolutely. So, almost like the little special handshake, at certain meetings and networking events. Absolutely. You don't, pleasing everybody pleases nobody at the end of the day, does it? That's the thing. Yeah. Yeah,
for sure. So how long do you think it takes to see that impact? So some people say that it can take, some people say even up to 3 years before your podcast really gets going. What is your opinion on that?
It depends on how you approach it. I mean, up until quite recently, I would have been saying that because I worked in the organic only space. This is kind of like the secret sauce that we have at Podknows in a way that what we do is we don't leave it to chance.
Yeah.
I've learned, that if you want to get results, you have to pretty much guarantee results. And the only way you can guarantee results is actively seeking them out. The analogy I use is, imagine you're a brand new restaurant opening in a town, and the restaurant has never been a shop unit ever before. It's been maybe a block of flats that have been gutted out and turned into retail units. When you open your brand new restaurant in town that's never had a retail unit where it is, how can you expect that on opening night, without doing any marketing, no word of mouth, no telling anybody about it, your plan for opening night is just open. Have the menus on the tables and the open sign turned around the door. How are you going to expect anybody to show up and have a meal for at least 12 months?
Yeah.
That tends to be kind of around about the time it takes to grow any sort of business, retail or otherwise. So you're doing the same thing with your podcast. If you're just publishing content and you're not doing any marketing, you're not telling anybody it's there, you're just putting it out into the RSS feed, shoving it into Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the other apps out there, and then putting content out there. Why are you expecting any more than like your mum, your best friend, and a couple of people on your WhatsApp group to ever listen? They're not going to, because they don't know it exists. So that, for me, is what it's about. First of all, you need the discovery bit taken care of, which means you need to know how to reach those audiences that might be interested in the first place. Then, once you've actually established that and you have new people sampling, to use the restaurant analogy, you've managed to get a few people in the front door. Well done. You've been going for 3 weeks. Now people are starting to get wind of the restaurant. They're coming in. They're enjoying it. They're sampling some dishes. Do they like the dishes? That's the next challenge. So it's all very well getting the people in listening, but do they like what they're hearing?
Yeah.
So in terms of how you then grow it to make that impact is going to depend on, again, whether or not you're willing to go outside of that central safe space. Are you willing to understand that 50% of the people that are going to listen to your show for the first time are going to hate it? They're never going to want to listen to it again because they don't like you, because you say things they don't like. But then 50% are going to absolutely love it. And they're going to follow, they're going to review it, they're going to listen every single episode. And yeah, that's not an overnight win. Even if you're going with the sort of like what we do, which is, paid strategic, finding their audience for them. Even with that, we can only find the audience. We can't make you make impact. Obviously, we can steer them towards making impact by the coaching we give them and the direction and the style of editing that we do and how we guide them on recording their episodes. But at the end of the day, the impact comes from them. I can't make someone say something outlandish. That's down to them and whether or not they're brave enough to. Thankfully, with my clients, they do take direction really well. And I'm very intentional about, again, being really careful about who I work with. I don't just work with anybody. That's why I have to chat with them a few times and understand who they are, what makes them tick, who they are as a person. Can I help this person to grow and establish a podcast that makes impact? And if the answer to that is no, let me give you the name of somebody else I think could probably work with you.
Yeah. No, that's really good because it's a lot of your time and, coming alongside this potential client. So you want to make sure that you're a good fit.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's crucial. In fact, I would say, there are some people out there that they will work with any and everybody. And, you'll see them bragging, oh, I'm working with 150 shows now. Are you? Are you really though? Or are you just churning out content? And I think that in my view, they haven't done enough to, like I say, develop the characters, understand who they are, what they stand for. Are they aligned? I think you can always tell production companies that are just that, production companies churning out content. And I think it's really important, when you've got people that are really tuned in to what they're doing and doing it for the right reasons, you'll find that the number of output of shows is a lot lower.
Yeah. because it's more substantial.
Yeah, you've got a mission. You've built a relationship. You understand what each other wants from the efforts, and you absolutely are aligned on where things are going. You know, at the very beginning of any relationship that I have with any podcaster, we get it really clear. Right, what's the goal? What? When we look back 5 years from now, back to now, what are we proud of? What do we want better?
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, few of them say more downloads, because that's not actually what they want. They don't want more downloads. They want more impact. Yeah, sometimes that's sales. Sometimes that's growth of their business. But 9 times out of 10, it's actually something much, much more important to them, like growing themselves, understanding themselves better, understanding their ideal customers better, and achieving something specific within the world with what they're doing.
Yeah. What have you found that people underestimate about growing a successful podcast?
The effort and time. It's not, like I say, it's not easy. You know, it absolutely breaks my heart when I see someone that is excitedly announcing the launch of their podcast, and there are telltale signs that they haven't given it any thought whatsoever. They've just literally gone, I'm going to start a podcast. They've recorded a trailer and they've stuck it out in the world. They haven't done any prep. They haven't done any strategy. They haven't done any thought into what they're achieving. And you can tell this because they will say, and I'm paraphrasing, but it will be something along the lines of, I'm going to tell more stories in the business world by interviewing thought leaders within the world of business. Okay. You've just described 30,000 shows. What's yours going to do differently? What do you mean, what's mine going to do? I'm going to interview thought leaders in the world of business to help people develop their business. Yeah, cool. Okay, good luck with that. People don't... You wouldn't start a brand new business without having an idea, like, if you're really thorough about it, you do the business plan, you take that to people to give you critical feedback. You might hire a business coach. You might speak to a financial planner. You might do all that stuff that legit businesses tend to do if they want this thing to work. You don't just go, I'm going to buy the domain and start trading. But that's kind of what people do with podcasts. They go, I'm going to buy the domain. I'm going to launch the RSS feed. I'm going to grab myself a free RSS feed from Spotify for Creators. Low investment, low risk, very low commitment. And that's it. And then they wonder why it doesn't work. Because they're doing the same thing that millions of other people have done before them and will continue to do probably years into the future as well.
So what would you say does make a podcast work for a business?
I think having a clear idea of what it is about you that makes you stand out, that makes you unique, that gives you a purpose, that makes your ideal clients resonate with you. If you cannot identify what that is in yourself, you're not going to have much luck doing it through a podcast. That's my honest view. I think business coaches are very guilty of this, honestly. They go, oh, I'm a business coach. Okay, but what about what you do as a business coach is unique to you? Well, I talk to people with kindness. Okay. Cool. But what is it about what you do that makes you unique? Well, I don't use whiteboards and marker pens. Okay, cool. Again, we're talking about process here. We're not talking about your id, what it is about you that makes you unique. Do you coach brand new businesses? Do you coach established businesses? Do you coach CEOs? Do you coach the shop floor? Do you coach people using established processes? Do you coach with a new process? What is it about you that's unique to you? Do you only coach men? Do you only coach women? Do you only coach people under 30? That's still quite surface level, but 90% of these people don't even think that through. They're just like, well, I'll take anybody on. Of course, I want to help everybody.
Yeah.
And it's like, what's your podcast about? Well, it's about everything, really. We talk about this, we talk about that. Good luck getting an audience.
That's really insightful. So what I think you're saying is that to niche it down as much as possible is the way to go.
Niche and then niche and then niche again.
And then niche again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you know, I've got a great real world example of this. So I was doing a bit of research a couple of years ago, and somebody, I can't remember who it is that now quotes me on this. It might be Dave Jackson. Shout out to Dave Jackson if it is you. But I talked on an episode about this this podcast that approached me, and they were like, "My friends have all told me that I haven't got a chance in hell of getting a podcast going here, but I think there's something in this." I was like, "Right, okay, what's your niche?" He was like, "Basket weaving." I was like, "That is brilliant. Yes." But can you nail it down even more into like a specific type of basket weaving? Yeah. Are there different types of basket weaving? He's like, well, yeah, you can use this particular type of wick. You can use this particular type of fabric, you know? And I was like, right, okay, so are you going to talk about that type of fabric or that? Oh, well, I'll probably go with that type of brilliant. Right. Okay. And which territories do these things sell in? Oh, well, I mean, you know, and we literally went down that road of like, yeah, great. Yeah, great. Cool story, bro. But what else? Yeah. And, you know, he managed to get 3,000 downloads in his first month.
Wow.
Based on the idea that he had. And he was like, there's going to be 3 people listen to this, but I don't care. I want to do it. 3,000 for the most niche, because there are people out there looking for topics on basket weaving. Of course they are. You know, it's how many people are there in the world? Billions, right? What are the chances that a big community of people are into the very thing that you think 9 people are going to be into around the world? It's that's I think that's really important. I think if you think you're in a pool where there aren't many fish swimming around, great, that's what you want to go for.
Yeah. It's better to have that niche of people that are actively listening than having thousands and thousands of downloads that are often just, you know, automatic downloads that people actually don't listen to.
Absolutely. Yeah. We all know about automatic bot downloads 100%. Yes. And I think, if you've got, I always say this to people, you know, oh, well, this person I know has got 30,000 downloads a month. Cool. How many of those are actually genuinely interested? And how many of them are just people that maybe followed, automatically download the show and never listen to it, versus someone who's got 30 people that hang on every word, listen week in, week out, and actually are probably more likely, if you're doing it as a business, to buy from you, or at least get engaged in your community that you're promoting.
Yeah, for sure. That's excellent. Changing direction a little bit again. So looking forward, what's next for Podknows and your own current podcast and the one you've got coming?
So immediate goal is to do more work in helping people to grow big. I mean, we've changed messaging from start a podcast that makes impact to start a top 5% podcast that makes impact, because I want more shows to know they can do it, that they can compete with the big boys. The charts don't matter, because you've got Stephen Bartlett at number 1 in the business charts. Yawn. That doesn't mean that you can't find your own audience that's more aligned with what you do. So certainly growing that strategy part of it. It is strategy. There's a big component of strategy involved, you know, in terms of how we find their audiences. A lot of targeting involved, a lot of paid traffic, but also a lot of, you know, PR, earned media, that sort of stuff. So growing that, becoming more, you know, my whole thing is I like to become an expert in every aspect. I mean, I'm not the best at everything I do. Nobody can be. But I like to get to the point where I have achieved mastery and become the best that I can do in that aspect. And that's kind of that's why my show was originally called The Podmaster, you know, attaining pod mastery, because it was about that for me. It was like, you need to become a master at what you do in order to grow. Yeah. Now I've sort of loosened up on that a little bit now. I don't think you need to be a master at everything you do. I think you just need to be across everything you need to do in order to grow. So for me, it's kind of, all the aspects that I learn as I go, whether that be paid traffic, Google ads, meta ads, guests swapping, feed dropping, optimizing for SEO. I mean, that's what I was kind of like thriving on in 2021 was like the SEO. When I look back on it now, my God, you were selling to clients based on just being able to title episodes correctly. Wow. Okay. How far you've come, so that's what the journey is for me, is like constantly growing, constantly developing my talent in terms of what I offer to clients. And that's kind of like the next couple of years. And then eventually my dream is to franchise Podknows out into small businesses, solopreneurs who want to help people grow podcasts using our blueprint of what we do that helps achieve those results for people. So they don't have to take the risk of being the startup. They can, they can work within an established framework that people will start to recognize. Oh, okay. Yeah, Podknows, that's the top 5% people. Oh, you've got that bit. Okay, cool. Definitely will work with you. Because I can't be everywhere. Sadaf. I can only help a certain amount of people. And, I very much limit myself to who I work with based on what we've said earlier about, making more impact. If I'm churning out 100 shows, I can't make that impact. But if I've got 10 people, each putting out 10 shows under my franchised brand, where they can make their own living, but they don't have the risk attached of, oh my God, how am I going to compete with all these other podcast companies? Then that's kind of my dream. So it's not a financial one. I'm so altruistic, aren't I?
No, I think it's great. And, listening to you speak and what you've just said now, it echoes back to what you were saying earlier about having a challenge and wanting to understand every aspect of it and get on top of it. And, you said it yourself, master it. So I think that's great. And I also love how you're thinking forward about how can the impact just keep multiplying. It's not just all on your shoulders.
Scale sensibly is kind of my thing. I had somebody offered to invest in my business, and it wasn't what I wanted at the time, because it was like, okay, so that's going to make me suddenly massive. That's going to bring me more pressure. It's going to bring me more clients. Yes, the revenue is going to increase. It's going to allow me to do more things, but it's going to allow me to do more things on what they think is workable versus what I want to do. And so I sort of like was thanks, but no thanks, maybe in 5 years' time. It's always been really important to me to scale this properly. I'm not going to lie to you and say I don't dream of having, the big income and, buying a nicer house, buying a nicer car, having nicer holidays, doing nicer things with my life. Of course I want all that, but I want to do it on a sensible level where I know that I'm not, the easiest thing in the world would be for me to take client after client after client, hire people to do the editing for me, never listen to the finished results, just publish them out in the wild. And the first I know that it's not working is when someone complains. I don't want to be Tesco.
No.
I want to be heavily involved in everything I do. Quality and attention to detail and quality assurance are really important to me. There was, even when I was a kid and I worked at Tesco, I used to pride myself when the manager would come up and say, "Oh, you've had praise from customers. They've come to the customer service desk and said, oh, I really like the lad on the cheese counter. I really like the lad on the fish desk. He's really thorough and was, really trying to understand what I wanted. You're selling fish, but that was important to me. And that's always carried through with me, that I've always wanted people to understand the value of what I bring them. And that will never change.
Yeah. I think that speaks volumes about how you approach and run your business. Like, even down to the character development that you talked about earlier on, that it's about really understanding the client and what you can bring out in them that's going to make their show really successful.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so.
That's really great. Neal, this has been really fun and really insightful. Thank you.
No, thank you. Can I flip the script a little bit, and can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What would be, based on what I've said to you, what would be the one piece of advice you would give me?
Honestly, thinking back, over the conversation that we've had, I feel like it's been truly, I've said it, it's insightful. It really has been insightful. I really have learned a lot from you. The whole part about the character development, I thought was very cool. I'd not thought about things like that before. So I'm not sure what advice I would give you. I'm looking at my notes now. Maybe like when I've slept on it, I'll have something like, oh, I should have said that to Neal. And in which case, look out for an email from me. Let's put it that way. But yeah, Neal, before you go though, if someone wants to learn more about your work or connect with you directly, where should they go to do that?
Well, if they want to listen to the show, Podcasting Insights, you can find that pretty much anywhere. You know, I even do YouTube now, Sadaf. Can you believe this? I actually put this on video.
Excellent.
God, what am I doing? But you can find that at podmastery.co. But if you want to find out more about what we do as a business, and we've got hopefully quite a helpful blog that you might be interested in looking at, which is podknows.co.uk. But what I would say to anybody who wants to know more about how they can grow their podcast or, start a podcast, then, insert Sadaf's contact details right now here, because you definitely need to talk to Sadaf about growing your podcast.
Thank you, Neal. Thank you. And to those listening, all of Neal's links are going to be in the show description for you. And if you're a business owner thinking about podcasting or already podcasting but not seeing the results that you want, I hope this conversation showed you what is possible when you approach it strategically. If this episode was helpful, I'd love it if you shared it with another business owner who might benefit. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.